All right, let's try this again. So I have not posted videos in a long time. My car is filthy. I've been completely slammed, very busy, and that's partially why I haven't posted anything. In a weird way, though, it's all resulting from good things that I can't quite announce. There's a little bit that I can give just to tease what's coming down the pike, which is I have a publishing deal. I can't announce with who, and I can't announce for what. It's not related to Two Stories, which is the book that I am currently working on, and I'm knee-deep in creating Two Stories Book 2 as well. But anyhow, I've been prepping final files for that book, which should come out like within the next year, which I'm pretty excited about, but I can't give any more information than that. I will say, with all that going on, I'm pretty excited because that's going to put me in a position where, by the end of 2022, I'm going to be a person who's finished, written and completed 2 published graphic novels, which is pretty exciting. And hopefully by the end of the following year, I'll be a person who's written and completed and drawn and created 3 entire graphic novels. That's my goal. But we'll see how that goes. So I will keep you guys in the loop as I'm able to. Sometimes when you're working on projects, like book projects, you aren't allowed to be fully open about the entire process. Some of that has to do with just kind of trying to generate excitement. Some of that also just has to do with the timing of when these books can be released in catalogs, when you want to roll out a marketing campaign, and all of that fun stuff. So again, I'm no expert on this kind of stuff. This will be my 2nd book coming out, but yeah, I mean, we'll just kind of have to roll with it and see how it goes. But yeah, but that's that kind of catches us up. I was at a point where I was doing a lot of these vlogs in my car, and to be honest, this little thing up here kind of broke, and I think I've been able to kind of adjust it to where vlogs might be able to happen, but at the same time, I need to personally be a little more proactive in making sure that I replace the little holder for my camera whenever possible, so that I can basically do that. I am on my way to work. I'm heading to where I work as a full-time art director, and then I'm also knee-deep in my 2nd graphic novel. And so before I kind of get into a little bit of what I wanted to talk about today, I'm gonna also sort of real quickly pivot, because my idea for what I'd like to talk about today is kind of visualizing success and realizing those successes, and just a little bit of my thoughts on that. I think sometimes people can kind of talk about self-thinking and positive thinking and actualizing things in some sort of woo-woo, mystical way that I think can actually be off-putting to a lot of people. And so my goal is to have a conversation about that in a very real, practical, applicable way that maybe will help you as well as me get better at kind of creating these realities that actually come to fruition as an artist for your dreams, which is kind of cool. So before I get into that, I do want to mention I have 1 graphic novel out that's hand-lettered, hand-inked, and is about faith and mental illness. It talks about my life in a very real, autobiographical way, about a time in my life where I personally was, as a person who struggles with depression, I was in the depths of depression, experiencing suicidal ideation, and all sorts of very heavy topics my wife was struggling, who was my fiance at the time, was struggling with panic disorder. And we kind of get into, in that book, I get into the kind of ins and outs of that, as well as playground politics in elementary school, sort of juxtaposing depression for adults and depression for kids, and what the two, kind of how they compare and contrast, as well as sort of juxtaposing my desire for overt control over my life at the time, which was a big source for myself of my depression, with that of a child trying to control a playground game and not succeeding too well at it. So it's an interesting book. I've heard a lot of really good things from people who've read it. I've rarely met, I don't think I've met anyone who read it and didn't enjoy it or get something out of it. And so I highly recommend. Ooh, these allergies. If you see me kind of squinting like this, it's because I get allergies this time of year. But anyhow, it's a book that right now is like, if you get it through Amazon, I think you can get it for like under $5, which is insane for a graphic novel. Like I said, I'm currently working on a book where I actually currently kind of wrapped up with the interiors and the cover, not the full cover, of a book that I can't talk about. But I can say, I doubt that kind of deal that's going on Amazon, where it's only like $5 for a graphic novel, is going to happen a lot with projects I work on. So you might as well go take advantage of it. Get yourself a copy. The holidays are not that far around the corner, so I would recommend, like, hey, if you already got a copy a while ago, they usually have a limit because it's such a ridiculous sale, but that limit expires after a while, so you might be able to get yourself or your friends or family another copy of that. And I appreciate every single person who has done that, because that's the ultimate way to support art and support artists. And doing this video and these vlogs is a good reminder to wash my car. I don't know if you've noticed, but yeah, my car, that's not a good window to have. So maybe I'll do that later today too. So I'm on my way to work, and I was just thinking about some things that are pretty cool. Like, my wife and I have, in the last few years, gotten out of credit card debt. We were in a pretty heavy amount of credit card debt, and I don't want to go into like the ins and outs of how we ended up there. A lot of it was situations outside of our control, and some of those situations I actually am addressing in my second book, Two Stories, book 2, which I'm knee deep in making. But long story short, like, I was a victim of violent crime quite a few years back. And so that was also when I was uninsured, and so our hospital bills were pretty expensive at the time, and that sucked, and it kind of put us in a hole, as well as some like other really poor financial decisions and stuff. But anyhow, point being, I personally do not like credit debt. I don't like being in debt to anyone. And credit debt in particular was really weighing on us, and really eating into our financial stability. And we set a goal to get out of credit debt. And the way we attacked it was, we started with, and this was a pretty large amount of debt. It wasn't like a small amount of credit debt. So we had a couple cards, and what we decided to do was actually switch to zero interest cards, split our debt, because it was a very large chunk of money, so we split it into like 3 zero interest cards, because we do have really good credit, because of the fact that you know, we pay our bills on time. I'm big on that. Like, I really personally think that's, if you can, you should always pay your bills on time. At the same time, in fact, if you can, pay them early and be consistent with it. It's a huge help in life to have good credit. So anyhow, point being, we were fortunate enough to have pretty good credit, so we opened up a couple accounts that had zero interest, and then just split our debt on those accounts. And then what we would do was, when the zero interest kind of started running out on one of the cards, because half the catch with the zero interest debt is they're kind of counting on you, A, defaulting on it, or B, still carrying the debt over when that zero interest expires, which it does on most of those cards. And at that point, then it kicks up to like a ridiculous interest that you'll never get out of. So being aware of that, we were kind of bouncing to different zero interest cards, just to try to contain the interest on the credit debt. The next thing we did was we started paying off the smallest sum of the cards, just to get a win. So what we started doing was just trying to pretend that whatever extra amount, and at first it started as like $10 extra, nothing huge, it was like $10 or $20 extra on our payment, and we just sort of pretended that that was the new payment. We continued to do that. Once we had that card paid off, surprisingly it goes very quickly, because especially with the amount of debt we had, the first was not an unreasonable amount of debt to get out of, the first card, once we'd split it 3 ways. So once we had paid off that card, what we did was pretended that that card's payment had never ceased to exist. And so even when that card, as you pay off a credit card, what they do is they lower your minimum payment. We just would pretend that the minimum payment had never lowered. So we just rolled that payment onto the next payment, and eventually that card got paid off fairly quickly. And then what we did again was pretending that both of those now monthly payments hadn't disappeared. We rolled those 2 payments on our third payment, and by kind of assessing the situation, like starting, there's a point in this, and I'm not saying it's a surefire way to get out of credit debt. I would never pretend or purport to be a financial expert, but I found out that what we did, even though a lot of it was very basic and logic oriented, to get ourselves out of that situation was not uncommon for most people trying to get out of credit debt. It's the hard, long road that actually pays off and gets you to zero. And so since we've cleared our credit debt, it's improved our situation quite a lot. And again, life throws its slings and arrows, so that situation may not be like permanently, better. We might have some godforsaken event happen, or some terrible thing happen in our lives that kind of reverses course. But what's interesting to me and what's applicable to this video, and what I'm going to kind of get into, is there's a couple components to how we did this thing, accomplished this thing in our lives, that I use all the time in art, and it helps. It helps actually realize things you're envisioning or you're ideally thinking could happen in your life. So the number one thing is, I am not a person who daydreams often. A lot of people like to sort of have a fantasy world where they're like, hey, were I a different person, I would probably whatever, and fill in the blank. Or were I in better financial position, I would fill in the blank. That's not an activity I enjoy doing. Not that I shouldn't say I don't do it. It's just when I fantasize about the reality that I want, or the especially as an artist, like what I want to achieve, I very much just think about realities. So even if it seems very far away, I am thinking about a goal that I can make. That I can back plan, that I can knock off little parts of and then eventually achieve. It's a weird thing, and it's not like super complex. It's not rocket science. It's just I don't like dabbling in fantasy thinking outside of like my own art. I tend to like thinking about things that could be actualized. So that's something that has been a slight benefit to me, and I'll get into why that is. So a good example of my kind of personality, when my wife and I were first dating, she would sort of talk casually about like, wouldn't it be nice if we had a dog? And I didn't like having that conversation too often, because for me, when I decide to have a dog, I'm going to decide to have a dog, and then I'm going to back plan it, and I'm going to make a way where I can get that dog. I don't tend to be like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could have this? I tend to be the person who's like, it would be cool if we could have this. Here's how I'm gonna basically take it. I'm gonna back plan how I get from point A, person with no dog, to point Z, person with a dog. Same thing with a house or whatever. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the kind of fun application start. So I just wanted to explain that about my personality, because I'm fully aware, like, not everybody's built that way. I know a lot of people like fantasy thinking. I don't when it comes to my own life. When it comes to storytelling or writing, I really enjoy fantastical thinking. But yeah, I don't like engaging in that too much for myself. So that might be a unique thing. It might not, but it's something to keep in mind. Okay, so how this applies to art. When you're like, I want to break down what I did with the credit, and then explain how that applies to art. So with the credit debt, my wife and I had a goal to get out of credit debt, right? Which honestly, if you saw the number we were in debt, you'd probably be like, that's pretty fantastical thinking. You guys are pretty in the hole. Like, we were slightly close to where declaring bankruptcy might have been a better option. But declaring bankruptcy comes with all sorts of other things, and I frankly wanted to avoid those negative sides, especially considering we were trying to buy a house at the time. I didn't think bankruptcy was like a really good place for us to be. So what we did was assess our goal. Like, our goal was to get to 0 on credit debt. That's the wild goal. Number 2 was to take it and think of reasonable ways, like, what are the barriers that are getting us from our debt to 0? One of the barriers that came up was the interest rate. The interest rate is the big enemy, and one of the biggest things that's the hook of all credit debt, all predatory lending. It tends to come with such high interest rates that they're designed to hook you in, and hopefully never have you pay it off. Credit card companies aren't in the business of getting you out of credit debt. They're in the business of designing things so that you end up on that hamster wheel paying, 30, 40 more times what you owe. And so we figured if there was a way to get rid of that, that would be good. That's how we came up with the strategy of doing the 0 interest. We too talked to friends and family members who had financial advice and ideas, and we considered those ideas. We, number 3, looked at alternative visions than just the one we wanted. So we looked into the idea of like rolling the debt into our home, by refinancing, which we had some friends do. And the more I read up on that, the more I thought that is not a good strategy for us to achieve that goal, because that actually takes like a soft asset, like credit card debt that you can actually bankrupt out of, worst case scenario, and rolls it into a debt that's tied to an asset that you can now lose if you have to, God forbid, like declare bankruptcy or whatever. Anyhow, so we considered alternative viewpoints, and then we came up with a strategy. And my strategy was, in the past, if I do things in micro chunks and psych myself out to make it a hard and fast rule that I have to follow, I find that I am able to achieve things that seem impossible. And a lot of that is by breaking it down into smaller segments. That it's almost like if you were in a war, and you're overwhelmed by enemy forces on a battlefield. One really smart strategy is to split the forces into attackable, winnable scenarios. Because if you try to defeat an entire army all at once, you're going to lose. But if you can break their forces into smaller chunks, then you can actually achieve victory in small sections. And if you do that enough times, you can win a war, right? That's kind of how I view it. So that was a big step, was like break it into small chunks. The last part was staying consistent. Once we had established rules and deadlines and guidelines, we stuck true to those rules, deadlines, and guidelines. And of course, there were times where we weren't able to kind of stick with those things. But by making it like a hard and fast rule, the times we weren't able were more of an exception than a rule, because we already had our rule. Huge and very applicable to art. When I tie it into the art thing, I'm sure you're probably already seeing the connection, because I have pretty smart viewers. But I'll get into that in a second. Okay, and then the last thing was, when we completed it, the first card we celebrated. We made a little, almost like a routine where we'd freeze the credit card in a bowl of water, so that if we ever needed to use it, we'd have to sit there and watch it, watch the ice just kind of melt in order to use the card, and hopefully that would give us some self-restraint. But it was also a fun little celebration of like, hey, let's get rid of this card. Finally, when we achieved victory on it, it improved our lives. And what was cool was, and a lot of this is based on circumstances, there could have been a lot of things that could have come up that could have prevented us from achieving that goal of getting out of credit debt. We were fortunate, but we were also extra fortunate because we had our mindset focused on the goal of getting out of this debt. We, number two, had broken it down, and we had a pathway to achieve that goal. We, number three, had the resolve to attack and commit to doing the steps that it would take to achieve that goal. And number four, we worked harder and we sacrificed a little bit to get there. It was really hard. We were living under our means. Like, we had to kind of pretend that I made less money than I do. We had to pretend if we got extra money that it didn't kind of exist. And we are not wealthy. Like, my wife and I are by no means wealthy. We're probably like very lower middle class. In California, very lower middle class, because California is very expensive to live in. But that's how we did it. And what was neat was we actually did it. So we applied the same strategy to the idea of buying a house. My wife and I, when Benji was first born, we were living in a very small apartment in Long Beach, and we very quickly assessed that just wasn't necessarily sustainable or ideal for raising him. And I'm not criticizing anyone who has a kid and lives in an apartment. That's awesome. You should. But for us, for our own personal goals, we realized like that wasn't really cutting it. And I also realized that I needed to move up in creative, like that I wouldn't be able to just be a designer or an illustrator in order to achieve this goal of us getting a house, that I would probably need to move into a more executive role in creative in order to kind of make that happen. And again, using those same strategies, right, of goal setting, back planning, breaking it into attackable chunks, right, committing to spending the time and effort to follow that back plan in order to achieve it, and working a little harder and having less free time. All of that helped us get a house. And not only that, that publishing deal that I can't talk about very much happened in that same exact way, where I had an envisioned goal. Before that, getting a literary agent was a similar thing, where I had an envisioned goal. I followed those steps. So you can apply this to art, and that is going to actually help you achieve the things you need to do. If you have a graphic novel that you want to get done, you should assess it, you should make it a goal, you should back plan it, you should give yourself deadlines, give yourself a reasonable pathway to get there. Maybe an unreasonable pathway, but something you can commit to that's going to get you from point A to point Z, and you know the entire alphabet from A to Z of steps that you need to take to get to Z. And the big trick, which is something I have learned and gradually gotten better and better at in my life, which is hope and dreaming. Hoping and dreaming are huge, but actualized dreams, not just fantasy dreams, not, a useless dream is, I used to want to be a guitarist. That was fun. I used to want to be in a band. Those were the days. An actualized dream is like, I'm going to be in a band. Here's how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to take these steps, and I'm going to back plan how I can get there. And I'm going to be stubborn because I believe that it can happen. And I'm going to have faith that it can happen. And this is where, like, for me, being a Christian helps, is like, I have faith, and again, this isn't contingent on Christianity, but I personally have faith that if God wants good things for me, He will make those things happen. If God wants me in a situation, He's going to put me in those situations. If God wants to close a door, He's going to close that door, and it's going to slam in my face, and I can't fight God, right? But in general, I do honestly believe that I need to trust in God and trust in the process that God puts in my life. Now, that might seem like nonsense to you guys, but I will say there is... it's not nonsense to me, first off. And so I think it's very powerful. And I'm not saying that it leads... I don't want to be like a prosperity gospel guy. There's a lot of people of different faiths that will tell you, like, hey, if you, believe what I believe, like, all your problems are going to be solved, your reality is going to be better, your your life's going to be better. That is not the case. You can have great thinking, you can have a right mindset, you can have a right belief, you can have the right faith, you can have the right everything and still have everything fall apart. Because, again, like, we are not in control of our outer circumstances as much as we'd like to pretend we are. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about Christianity that helps me embrace, is the fact that I do not have as much control over my life as I'd like. That's just a reality of life. Is like, there are circumstances that happen that are outside of an individual's control. However, there is a magic and a power to actualizing a dream. And part of it is setting a goal, convincing yourself through, not delusion, but through proper reading on it, proper planning of the reality that it could be a reality. Resting in hope that that reality could come to fruition. And then just having the discipline to show up, to make the sacrifices needed, and spend the extra time needed in order to actualize those dreams. So, none of this works without that first step of dreaming, but dreaming with intention. So, I know psychologists, at least I've known a few in my life, that have a method where they just ask someone, what do you want? And what are you going to do to get it? And that's it. That's the question. So it's like, what do you want? Well, I want to have a graphic novel done. What are you going to do to get it? Well, in order to do that, I need this. Okay, what are you going to do to get that? So on, right? Like, you could just follow those two questions. If you can just apply them to your artistic goals, it's going to get you really far, especially if you take action based on information. So yeah, so that's me rambling before work about actualizing. I'm not saying that it's always going to work out. I'm definitely not going to be like a huckster online who's like, if you do this, you're going to be a successful, amazing artist with like 1 million fans. I don't know. I'm not doing this to like sell you on some sort of proven success strategy. I'm just saying that when I've applied this in my life, now, like, for instance, I just want to explain the benefits of this when you put it into action. Of course, with the fortune of being in a position where you can, right, take those actions. Some of that being wild fortune, and a lot of it being just goal setting, back planning, taking actionable steps and commitment to the process and faith in the fact that it can happen. And well-researched faith, not blind faith. Blind faith is a fool's errand, right? You want faith that's provable. Like, faith, in an artistic sense, it can be a matter of, like, I've seen someone else within my means, right? My financial means, my family situation, whatever it is, I've seen people do it. And that means it can be done. That kind of thing. So, anyhow, point being, sorry, we're getting there. The point of this is just basically actualizing goals. And how goals actualize in my life have all come out of that. So let me explain one thing as a cool result that kind of ties into the whole my wife and I getting out of credit debt thing. So when we got out of credit debt, we
we're suddenly in a situation where now this house that we're blessed to have, like, we're very fortunate to have a house. We're not like, we don't have millions of dollars. We're not wealthy individuals. But we've been able to accrue savings, and then a little bit above our savings, work on things that are much needed things in our house. So, because we're not super wealthy, the house we bought has these floors. I'm just explaining by like an example of how this kind of thing pays itself off in a weird kind of karmic way. Not always, but at least so far I've found it to be true about this actualizing goals thing. So we bought a house that was rented to a couple people before we owned it, and of course has a lot of that like renter's damage to it, cheap fixes, like plaster in areas where they should have actually just put new drywall, stuff like that. But one of the biggest issues with our house was, like, first off, we live in a desert and we need air conditioning. So our goal after getting out of credit debt was like, once we do this, let's look into air conditioning and then do the same thing we did with the credit with air conditioning, so that we're not like, when we're getting our air conditioning fixed, because we were running on a swamp cooler, which works in our area, but was really gross. If there was like a local fire, there's like smoke blowing into our house. It was pretty unbearable, actually. But we lived with that for like 7 years. But once we were out of credit debt, we realized, like, if we took the same resolve and the same back planning, we could build up savings, and then once we have an accrued amount that could cover the air conditioning, we can set that as our goal, back plan that, we can get the air conditioning done. And we did. The second thing was, we have wood floors that are like this really cheap, like, bamboo that's starting to erode because of the age of the house, because of the type of flooring, and because of previous owners, as well as our swamp cooler was not treating that floor very well. So we were like, wouldn't it be nice if we could have wood tile? Again, we got quotes, we got cross quotes. We weren't stupid about our dream. Like, we thought, okay, let's make this happen, but in an achievable way. And we followed the same step. And now, this next week, I'm going to be out of the house for about a week with my family. We're going to stay with family while our floors get redone. It is a weird thing that starts happening. I'm just saying, when you envision a goal, you try for it, you back plan it so that those attempts aren't just in vain. And then, break it into manageable, but not totally manageable, a little bit above goals, actionable goals that you can carve away at, work at, and spend extra time. It's like, if you need extra income, you're going to work a little more. You take on a second job, whatever it is. But you start just carving at that actionable goal in little reasonable chunks, and that can make realities happen. This is so true for art that it's. I'm sure you guys already see the parallel, but I'll spell it out. Like, with a graphic novel, it's no more the same, or no different. You have to have faith that you're able to achieve a graphic novel. You have to back plan into reasonable, actionable steps. You have to commit to deadlines and to those reasonable steps. And what's weird is, if you stay at it, you end up with a graphic novel. Same thing with getting a publishing deal. And these things, all of these things I'm talking about, getting out of credit debt, art goals, house goals, whatever, you're not always going to be able to control the amount of time that it takes, right? Like things will come up, and this is one of the reasons I love that book, The War of Art, by Stephen Pressfield. Is it kind of breaks down the creative process as like going to battle, and one thing I love about that book is it talks about resistance, which is what you experience whenever you're trying to do something positive for yourself, or for your life, or make an improvement that will actually have lasting, impactful change, like creating art. The second you start trying to pay off credit debt, everything in the world you want to spend money on is gonna like blink in front of you, and you're gonna be presented with a bunch of options to fall back in the same old habits, or fall back in the same old trap that you fell in the first place. Once you've escaped a trap, traps come like tenfold. And similarly with graphic novels, like the second you really commit to your art, you will find, a lot of resistance comes out of the woodworks. So having that actionable back plan and the faith that you can actualize these goals, whether it's stubbornness or whatever, that to me is like the magic of sort of self-actualizing goals. So I hope that doesn't sound too woo-woo or weird. It's something that's on my mind now. It's a good reminder to me in my life to continue to not forget that while we're not in full control, like we aren't necessarily the builder of the car that we're driving, we're not necessarily in control of the road conditions, like in our car, or the circumstances around our car. We still have a steering wheel, and we have some say in how the car drives, and in the destination that car goes. So yeah, so that's it. That's all I have to say. I hope you liked this. I hope it wasn't too obvious or redundant or simplistic, and I definitely hope it doesn't minimize the real struggles that I know for a fact artists go through, as well as people in this life. Being somebody who didn't grow up very wealthy, didn't have kind of a silver spoon handed to me, I relate and understand and very much empathize with circumstances that are out of your control. And also my life, again, like to a lot of outsiders, they might look at me and be like, this dude is not like super wealthy, he's not whatever, but to me, for my own goals, I feel like in the last few years, I've personally had a lot of successes for actualizing goals that I've had for myself, and I've started seeing these things as very applicable and helpful in my life. If it weren't for these things, I would not be an art director. I would definitely not have like this kind of process I was talking about. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have a graphic novel. I wouldn't really probably be a cartoonist. I probably wouldn't have finished art school. I definitely wouldn't have finished grad school. I'd still be knee deep in credit debt, and I'd probably be $1 short and a day late on everything. And so that's why I kind of wanted to share it. But I do want to really clarify that I'm not saying this is some magic fix-all, or that this is like some snake oil that you can take that's going to make your life better. I will say, I think that if you put this into action, it will help your life, and improve conditions, as long as you're kind of willing to adjust and adapt with things that come and interfere with those plans, that back plan or whatever, and also just have faith in the process and the fact that like you are capable of more than you realize. All right, guys, if you like this, hit subscribe, hit the bell, make sure you're following my channel, make sure that you go purchase 2 Stories Book 1, which is my graphic novel about faith and mental illness. You can also follow me on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, basically where I post, pretty much try to post like a panel a day of comics. And you can follow the progress on 2 Stories Book 2, which will be all the more fun if you've read 2 Stories Book 1. And now I got to get to work. So, all right. Have a good one, guys. Bye.